fair while ago now, we saw the release of the latest DreamWorks animated movie, Dogman. I do realise that for most people this film came out months ago, but Australia was getting in on a delayed schedule, which is absolutely lovely. I hate that sort of thing so much. Regardless, a little while ago, I finally decided I needed to watch this movie because I'd heard a lot of good things about it. Financially, it seems to have done pretty well for itself. It had a budget of merely $40 million, which is a drop in the bucket in this day and age. Seriously, DreamWorks rather famously makes their films on the cheap compared to the major studios like Disney or Pixar. As of right now, it's grossed $135 million, which, whilst low by the standards of the big studios, is still good when you factor in that tiny budget. I would expect that they made a profit on this film, even if small. It's always nice to see the lesser studios doing well. Hopefully DreamWorks can re-establish themselves as a top-level studio again someday. Although I'm pretty sure they don't even animate their own movies anymore, do they? This was done by Jellyfish Pictures or something like that. Every time I remember that DreamWorks is just a shell of what it was, it never fails to make me so sad. Ultimately though, the money side of things should matter nothing to the average consumer unless you're an investor or a fanboy. What should matter more is the response, both critical and audience. In terms of its critical response, Dogman has an 80% approval rating off of 96 reviews, and in terms of audience score, an 82% off of over 2,500 reviews. Not all that many reviews for the audience side of things, but then again, when you look at the gross, it's not like the film was widely watched. Regardless, this all had me rather optimistic that the movie was going to be decent. For once, there seems to be a general consensus between critics and the wider audience that the movie is worth it. It's rather rare for family films these days, where it feels as if there's a massive gulf between the audience and the critical perception. On top of those promising signs was also the fact that whilst I was never all that familiar with the source material of Dogman, I do know the author. Dave Pilkey's the man. Growing up, I loved the Captain Underpants books. Somehow, I've never actually bothered to sit down and watch the film adaptation, which is 8 years old by now. But at every book fair during my primary school years, you'd better believe I was getting the latest edition. Looking back, they are some of the silliest books ever written, but I guess that's part of the charm. That being said, until the first trailer for this movie, I'd never heard of this secondary franchise. Apparently it's a spin-off of the Captain Underpants books, and it's meant to be an in-universe comic book written by the two kids, George and Harold, when they were young, but it probably came out after my time. I was reading Captain Underpants in the early to mid-2000s, and this book series only started coming out in 2016. I was unlikely to pick it up. But the film version? Yeah, I'm down for that if it can capture the goofy absurdity that made the Captain Underpants books so funny. Nowadays it feels like so many kids' films are trying to be filled with this immense emotional depth and complex storylines. I'm not against that, but when you have something absolutely insane, I enjoy that too. This could potentially fill a niche that needs to be filled. With all that being said, I sat down to give it a watch and I thought this movie was absolutely incredible. And it was everything I wanted it to be. The story begins in OK City, which is plagued by the criminal machinations of the evil cat, Petey. His latest scheme is a bomb threat on a local abandoned warehouse, and so famous cop Officer Knight and his pet dog Greg arrive to defuse the bomb. After a long chase of Petey through the streets of the city, they arrive on the roof of the warehouse, where through his stupidity, Knight accidentally sets off the bomb prematurely, leaving both him and Greg severely injured. Rushed to a local hospital, it's determined that Knight's head is dying and Greg's body is dying, and so the only way to save them is to combine them into Dogman. You would assume that this is just Greg's head on Knight's body, but I sort of think it's implied that somehow their two consciousnesses merged into one being who only ever goes by Dogman, not just Greg. If it was still just Greg, I feel like they'd call him Greg. That being said, it is intentionally stupid and so doesn't need to make sense. Dogman becomes famous in the city as he easily and repeatedly apprehends and arrests Petey the cat no matter what gadgets or plans he comes up with, who in turn is sent to what seems to be a low security prison for cats that he simply escapes from as soon as he can using very basic techniques. The mayor decides that it must be Dogman's fault for Petey's repeated escapes, and so he's taken off the case despite the chief going to bat for him and explaining there's no way that it could be because of Dogman. It doesn't matter to the mayor though. And so Dogman begins to succumb to loneliness now that he's on his own and his girlfriend's dumped him and sold their house to move in with her brand new boyfriend, after like a day or something ridiculous. Very loyal. Dogman then buys a doghouse on the outskirts of the city and he moves there, only taking Greg's old ball as a memory of the life they'd shared before. After yet another failure, Peter decides to fire his assistant and purchases a cloning device, which he thinks he can use to make a copy of himself to serve as his own assistant and partner in crime. A true pair of evil geniuses. Unfortunately for Petey, he didn't read the fine print before his purchase, and so when he uses his DNA to create this new clone, he doesn't come out as an exact copy of him from the moment that he made the clone. No, it simply creates a child version of him without any of his memories. He in essence is a complete blank slate of a person, one who turns out to be a very kind and sweet little kitten who has no interest in being a supervillain and only wants to spend time with his new dad. To give him something to do, Dogman's given the job of guarding the corpse of the fish Flippy, a pet fish that developed psychokinetic powers and then died trying to enact his evil schemes. After Dogman rolls around on his corpse and somewhat destroys it, the Science Institute that wants to study his brain is forced to turn him into a mecha fish with titanium bones. Thinking that this would be a good component for an evil plan, Petey steals Flippy and reprograms him to be super evil, and then takes him to the living spray factory. But little Petey accidentally thwarts his plan, knocking the fish down the wrong pipe and stopping him from coming to life. In response to this, Petey abandons little Petey in a cardboard box, where he's eventually rescued by Dogman, who adopts him and takes him home where they have a lot of fun together. At the same time though, Petey reads a little comic written by little Petey about the two of them, and he slowly begins to feel guilty for abandoning him. After learning from his former assistant that little Petey's with Dogman, Petey and his robot go to fetch him, and the two begin to slowly bond again. At the same time, little Petey decides that his dad needs closure with his own father, and so he sends out the robot to find Grandpa, whilst Dogman and the news reporter set out in search of little Petey. Turns out that Grandpa Cat is completely unrepentant about everything he put his son through in abandoning him as a child, and as soon as he arrives, he's trash-talking his life. But hey, at least it brings the two Peteys a bit closer together. Also remember Flippy? His corpse is found in the living spray factory, and when playing with his body and trying to do trick shots into the bin, his claw pierces a pipe and floods the building with spray. Not only does he come back to life with the directive to destroy all do-gooders, but so does the factory itself, turning into a giant titanic monster doing Flippy's bidding. Petey and Dogman have their showdown, fueled by Petey's anger at his dad and his jealousy of Dogman and little Petey. It doesn't last long and Petey gets defeated yet again, only for Flippy to arrive and steal little Petey, as he's the biggest do-gooder of them all and must be destroyed. Dogman and Petey team up and build their own giant mech to fight the factory and a bunch of other buildings that have come to life, allowing little Petey to escape and get inside Petey's robot to help fight. After the tables have been turned and Flippy looks likely to win, Petey swaps with little Petey in the robot and is then taken by Flippy to be dropped in a volcano. Little Petey ends up saving the day by making a picture book for Flippy that gets him to reform, and it's all happily ever after. Petey and Dogman share custody, and Flippy goes to prison. Yes, this is legitimately the ending. They then throw a rave with the last of the anthropomorphic buildings, which was a laser pointer shop. Yeah, the story is by far the highlight of this film. As you can tell from the synopsis that I just gave, it is absolutely ludicrous. There are so many strange twists and turns that you're not going to see coming. So many clever jokes, so many silly jokes, so many so bad they're good jokes. The film truly thrives due to its fast-paced storyline and its narrative development, the feeling that literally anything can happen at any time in this movie, and the wonderful humor that's woven into it. The dialogue is snappy and sharp and goofy, and best of all, the actors are giving it their all. Seriously, there are no dud performances in this movie, and it goes a long way into making the script even funnier than it is. Some of the things they say and the situations they find themselves in would be nowhere near as funny without the actors absolutely going for it every chance they get. I think the highlight for me was the guy who voiced the police chief. Dude needs more voice roles, he's perfection. However, it's not all about the zaniness and the humor either. The film has a lot of depth. You get full arcs for Petey and Dogman and little Petey that all revolve around trauma and sadness and finding a new beginning. It's actually a really beautiful film about overcoming loss and pain and the loneliness of finding a new life, whilst also addressing the generational trauma of Petey's dad not loving him and walking out on the family, and how he's at risk of making the same mistakes with his new clone son. I think I'm even more impressed by all of this because I wasn't expecting this depth from this movie, masking these serious issues under the veil of what is a high-octane, zany adventure film. The music, the score, that's all good. Not much to say other than that. It was really bouncy and fun, but ultimately, it doesn't draw your focus in the same way as some of the other elements like the narrative and the visuals, which leaves us with the visuals and the animation. It looked great. It seemingly stayed true to the original book style, which to me is always a plus. I feel that DreamWorks has been very good at that in the last little while, having visual variety and using an animation style that fits the story and the characters. Here the style fits perfectly. It makes you want to smile, it makes you want to laugh. It's just a whole lot of fun, and how can you go wrong with that? Combine that with some really amazingly well done action sequences that tie everything together, and you have a film that well and truly stands out from the crowd. Honestly, I feel like it deserved more money at the box office. I suspect it's because it doesn't look like a normal film would. The big studios all gravitate towards a decently similar visual style these days. You can always tell which is which between Pixar, Disney, and Illumination, but they all have that same similar vibe. This film falls outside that visual styling, and so it might have put people off. Maybe they thought it looked cheap, I don't know. I also think the DreamWorks name just has very little draw power anymore, and they probably don't have the budget to do a massive marketing campaign. It's a bit of a shame, but it is what it is. And so with all that being said, these have just been my opinions, and I'd like to hear yours. What did you think of Dogman if you've seen it? Did you like it? Hate it? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.